Hey there, this is James Wilson with MTB Strength Training Systems and BikeJames.com. And in today's training tip, I wanted to highlight one of my favorite exercises, the kettlebell swing. The kettlebell swing is such a great exercise for us as riders because it builds hip strength, hip explosiveness really, good core strength. When done right, ingrains good body position, teaches you how to absorb impacts with your legs and your hips. So just a ton of great benefits for us as mountain bikers. So what I want to do is show you a couple things that I've found really help people get more out of this exercise and kind of simplify it a little bit. So the first thing that you want to do is know how to start this exercise properly. And my favorite method to start the swing is actually to start with the kettlebell a little bit in front of you. You're going to come down like you're getting set to do a deadlift position. And something that's really important, I'll highlight here in a second, is the idea of making sure that you try to keep your shoulders over your base of support. So I want to push my hips back behind me and try and keep my shoulders more over my feet, as opposed to tipping over and letting my shoulders come in front of my feet. Now both of these look pretty good from a hip hinge standpoint, but they're definitely not what we want. There's a big difference between what's happening there. So when you're tipping forward like this, you're placing way more strain on the lower back. You're not quite getting into the hips as well. When you're keeping the shoulders more over the feet, we're getting back into the hips, taking that strain off of the lower back. So just make sure you're keeping that in mind as you're coming down into position and doing your swings in general. So you're coming down, you're gonna find the kettlebell. Again, it's out in front of me, probably a little bit less than a foot. You don't want to reach too far to where your shoulders have to hunch. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my shoulders down away from my ears. You're almost going to like turn your elbows back behind you to kind of get the lats engaged. And then you're going to sit back in your heels a little bit. And you see how the kettlebell tips back towards me. So if I let go of the kettlebell right now, I would actually fall backwards. It's holding me up a little bit. So I'm cheating my weight back into my hips. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm gonna hike that kettlebell from that position back behind me. And if I'm not ready for it, it's like if someone was coming up to you and was gonna push you and you're just standing there neutral, you're gonna get pushed backwards. But if you can kind of set your weight a little bit and be ready for it, then you're going to be much more balanced when the actual force is applied. And so when you hike the kettlebell back, if you don't sit back into your hips a little bit, then you're going to end up getting knocked off balance. So you don't want to just be flat and neutral on your feet. Sit back a little bit. So once you've done that, you're going to hike the kettlebell back. When you hike the kettlebell back, you don't want anything to move. You want to just hike the kettlebell back, have your hands in up here in this position here. You can see my fingers back here, and then you're going to drive your heels into the ground. Think about squeezing a quarter between your butt cheeks or a lemon between your thighs, whichever visual helps you get those the glutes engaged, and get tall and thin at the top. Okay, and then you're just going to repeat that movement there. So, but the start is very important. There's a couple different ways to start it. In fact, I've got some videos that show different ways to start it, but in my many years of teaching this exercise, this is by far the best way to start this exercise. So, you're gonna hike the kettlebell back. Like I said, once you hike it back, you're gonna sniff in and breathe out on the way up. And when you're done, you just park the kettlebell. In fact, I'll have people practice that start. I'll have people just practice hiking it back, do one swing, and park. Hike, one swing, and park. And again, you want to practice being able to hike it with no movement. You don't want to change position, and you want to end in the same position as you started. So that's a good way to practice that right there. So once you got that down and you're ready to start doing your reps, the two things that I found really help people, again, get more out of this exercise is focusing on, I talk about butt back, chest down. You definitely want that. You want to push the butt back and let the chest come down. But like I mentioned earlier, more than that, you really want to focus on trying to keep the shoulders over your base of support instead of tipping forward. And this is very common with people that do swings, is this tipping motion right here, as opposed to sitting the hips back and keeping the shoulders. So if you focus on that, if you kind of keep that in mind, you'll find it'll help you sit back into the hips more, because you're not just letting the chest come down, you're actually trying to keep the shoulders over your base of support as all of that happens. And the other thing is attaching your breathing to the swing, which is something that enough people don't do, and that is sniffing in on the way down. So sniff in through the nose and then out on the way up. You're timing your breath with your hips. So you sniff in as your hips come back, and then you're going to come forward, and then as your hips lock out, you let the air out. And so you want to make sure that you're timing that breath with the hips and focusing on the hips, and not necessarily focusing so much on the kettlebell. The kettlebell will follow your hips, but focus on your hips. So you're sniffing in as you push the hips back, and then push them forward, breathe out. Again, those things that I talked about, driving through the heels, squeezing the limb in between your thighs or quarter between your butt cheeks, whatever visual helps you out with that. Tall and thin at the top, you cannot lean back. So think about you're trying to put on a pair of pants that's like 2 sizes too small when you're at the top of your swing, and that'll help you keep your core engaged and stay nice and tall and thin. So that's basically it. Quick tutorial on the swing. Again, those are the areas that I find most riders struggle with, is the start, making sure that they're actually sitting back into the hips and keeping their shoulders over their base of support and not tipping forward, and then attaching their breathing to the swing. So if you start doing those 3 things, you'll start getting a lot more out of this great exercise. So once again, this has been James Wilson with MTB Strength Training Systems. You can check me out on the web at bikejames.com, and I'll talk to you next time.